I have a story called Liberty Bee Mouse Comes to America. It's a super old story, as you can tell. Let's see if I can find the publishing date. It's actually just with a little bit of color and in black and white. It was 1986. Hey, that was the year Mrs. Ernest got married to Mr. Ernest. That was quite a long time ago, but I just love this book. I think it describes really well what might have happened. Here we go. Liberty Bee Mouse comes to America. Do mice really wear clothes? No, they really don't. So it's not a true story, but it has some interesting facts in it. Let's find out. Liberty Bee Mouse was on a ship. The ship was not big, but it seemed big to Liberty. After all, he was a small mouse, and a mouse is so small that most things seem big. And there he is, he's on that big ship. I bet that's true. I bet mice were often stowaways on big ships because a lot of times, a long time ago, well, we still have big ships, but a long time ago, that was one of the only ways to travel. Liberty was on a long trip. He was going far away across the big ocean. He was going to a place that was wide and wild. Liberty had never been there before. No one on the ship had been there before either. So there he is. I wonder where he's going. Hmm. Liberty was not afraid of the trip. At least that's what he told himself a million mouse times a day. Maybe he was a little afraid. You see, Liberty was looking for something. It was not something he had lost, but it was something he wanted very much. Liberty was looking for a new home. Interesting. I wonder why he wants to leave his home. Liberty had lived in London all of his mouse life, but now London was very crowded. Everywhere Liberty went, he saw feet. Feet on the streets, feet going upstairs, feet going downstairs, feet walking, feet running, big feet, little feet, feet. Everywhere he went, he saw feet. So London was getting pretty crowded. It's kind of like a city, it's a big city. London was not a safe place for a mouse anymore. It was not a safe place for man or a mouse. So Liberty decided to look for a new home. Liberty tied his mouse things in a big red handkerchief and he set out to find a new home. He had not gone 2 steps before he was caught up in the London feet and away he went. So there he goes. He's out to look for a new house, and all of a sudden the feet caught him and he went with the feet. Liberty held on tight to a big man's big shoe buckle with one hand. The shoe buckle smelled salty. He held on tight to his red handkerchief with the other hand. Liberty couldn't wait to see where he was going, but he was going somewhere. At least the feet stopped. Liberty was glad the bumpy ride was over. He let go of the buckle and hopped off the man's big shoe. Plop! Something landed beside Liberty. Liberty jumped. Then he twitched his whiskered nose. The something smelled salty, too. Where is he going? I think it smells salty because they're headed on that ship on the ocean, which is salt water. Liberty looked up, 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 up. He saw a big wooden trunk. Now Liberty was tired from the long, bumpy ride. He needed a rest, so he scampered up the trunk and peeked in the big keyhole. The trunk was dark and warm inside. Liberty sniffed. It smelled salty and spicy. Liberty felt safe, so he crawled in and curled up in a little round furry ball. Soon he was fast asleep. Liberty slept for a long, long time. He was really tired. When he woke up, he stretched and yawned. Then he crawled to the keyhole. Remember, he was in that big chest. Liberty looked out. He was on a ship. The trunk he had slept in was a sailor's trunk. Liberty was really going far from London. So there he is. He's sleeping in that trunk. And then he wakes up and he looks around and he finds out he's on a ship. Liberty had fun on the ship at first. He found so many places for a mouse to explore. He poked his whiskered nose into all kinds of holes. He ran up long lines. He sniffed barrels and boxes. And he slept in his warm, snug bed at the bottom of the sailor's trunk. So every night he went back and slept in his little trunk, or the big trunk, I guess. But soon Liberty Bee Mouse was hungry. Sea air really makes a mouse hungry, Liberty squeaked. So he looked for something good to eat. Liberty looked everywhere. He looked and he sniffed all over the ship. He found some round biscuits. He tried to nibble them, but they were as hard as cobblestones. That's like a rock. He spied some apples. Liberty loved apples. But when he took a bite, he found out that they were full of worms. Oh man, that's what happens on a long journey before because the food would start to get old. They couldn't pack the food to keep it fresh the whole journey, not like today where we have refrigerators and things like that. Poor Liberty, he was so hungry. I could eat a bear, said Liberty, if I could only find one on this ship. But he found hardly anything that was good for a mouse to eat. Liberty began to grow thin. He grew thinner and thinner. He was tired all the time. He was even too tired to go looking for food anymore. Liberty began to wish that he was back in London. A long time ago, when they took ship travels and voyages, they might have gotten hungry by the end of the trip too, and they were probably searching and hoping they would find land soon so they could get something to eat. But the big ship sailed on. Big winds blew the ship until it squeaked like a group of angry mice. Tall waves crashed over it. The ship rocked and rolled. It was hard for the little mouse to go anywhere at all. Liberty was tired, hungry, and sad. He was ready to give up. It had been a very long journey and he was very hungry. Land ho! Land ho! Liberty heard a sailor shout. The sailor had seen land at last. The long ocean trip was almost over. And there he was. He finally found land. Liberty felt better. He had hope now. He felt so much better that he wanted to see the land too. He ran to the tallest mast of the ship. Of course, he didn't run as fast as he used to run, but he still ran. There he is climbing the rope. It's amazing what mice can climb. They can climb up skinny ropes. They can climb up walls. They're amazing. Liberty finally reached the very top of the mast. He crawled into the crow's nest. When he had caught his breath, he looked all around. Squeak, squeak, cried Liberty in a really small voice. There's the land. I see it too. And Liberty was happy. I think he'll like living out in the woods, kind of like the woods behind me. At last, the long trip was over. Sailors dropped an anchor from the bow of the ship. It made a loud splash as it shot into the still water. All the sailors were busy. They pulled on ropes, they untied big knots. Everyone was in a hurry to leave the ship. Everyone was hungry. They wanted to walk on land once again, and Liberty did too. There they are lowering the anchor. Finally, a small boat was ready to be put in the water. The boat was filled with people. There wasn't room for even one more, but the sailors didn't know that there was still room for a mouse, especially if his name was Liberty. Liberty tied up the small red bundle. Goodbye, ship, he squeaked softly, and he scampered up the rope and onto the small boat. So there, he can climb the ropes and he can climb right over to the boat. Let's see what happens. Do you think the people are going to notice him? Liberty quickly looked around. He spied a sailor's stocking hat lying on the bottom of the boat. A hiding place, he thought, and he ran and hid under the sailor's hat. Liberty was just in time. Lower away, he heard the captain shout. The rusty pulleys turned, the ropes moved, and the small boat went down, 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 down to the water below. And the little mouse is hiding in that stocking cap. The sailors began to row. They rowed very slowly because they were tired and hungry too. Liberty stayed hidden. He wasn't sure how people would feel about a mouse on the boat, but it was hard not to peek out, and it was dark under the hat, so he did kind of peek out a little bit. There's the sailor rowing. Can't wait to get to land. They'd been on that ship a long time. Liberty smelled something good. He smelled growing things. He heard a happy sound. He heard seagulls crying. Bump! He felt something. The small boat had bumped up against a big rock. There it is. It landed. There's the boat. The sailor put down his oars. He reached for his stocking cap. He didn't know that Liberty was underneath. Now, squeaked Liberty, and he ran right down the sailor's striped arm. Avast! Cried the sailor. A stowaway! A stowaway mouse! What do you think of that? Liberty ran up the side of the boat and down a line to the big rock. Liberty was on land at last. He finally made it to land. I wonder what land he made it to. He looked around. He saw sand and grass waving in the light ocean breeze. Liberty looked up. He saw tall trees and a bright blue sky. I told you he landed somewhere like where I am right now. Liberty looked, except for I'm not by an ocean. Liberty looked down. He saw a tiny sea worm poking its head out of a hole in the sand, and the only feet he saw were his own. While Liberty was looking around, the people were busy landing too. They stepped on the big rock first, then they walked on the sandy shore. Everybody was happy to be on land once more, even the salty sailors. The sailors pulled the boat onto the sand. The sand felt good between their toes. The little sprouts of water sprang up wherever they walked. The sprouts meant that there were fat, juicy clams in the sand, and everyone knows that clams are good to eat, especially very hungry people. And there they are pulling the boat up, and they know that they'll be able to find something to eat for dinner tonight. Liberty Bee Mouse took one long last look at the ship he had been on for so many weeks. The Mayflower still looked big to the little mouse. It's one of the first ships that landed in America, and it brought people here so that we could live here. It's kind of cool. Goodbye, ship, squeaked Liberty for the last time, and he ran off towards the tall trees. He had found his new home at last. Liberty had come to America. And there he is. Is that how we got mice in America? Maybe. All right. I have to agree with Liberty Bee Mouse. I love living in America too. Bye. Until next time.